I think we're good to get started. It is 5:03. Thanks, guys, for coming in. We're just going to open up with what the ASA is, and Dr. Cornwell is just going to go over that real quick. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. On behalf of the Gordon College Student Chapter of the ASA, I'd like to welcome everyone to this wonderful Zoom session and thank Dr. Sherley for being willing to come and do this on Zoom. We were going to have this in person with a dinner and sort of semi-banquet in April, but it didn't work out that way. But we're really glad to be able to reschedule this event by Zoom. Before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of information about the ASA for those of you who are joining us for the first time and may not know about the ASA. So I need to switch my slides manually, sorry. So the ASA was founded in 1941 as an international network of Christians with interest in the science. And so this organization is for scientists as well as people who are interested in science. And it's a wonderful opportunity for Christian scientists to be able to gather together and share shared faith and science dialogue. And so the faith and science dialogue is mainly along three platforms, scholarship being one, professional development being a second, and then fellowship and networking, which is really important. And so those of you students who are listening right now, I encourage you, if you're not already a member, to get involved. There are over 4,000 members so far worldwide in all the different topics of science. And it's a wonderful opportunity to meet like-minded scientists who are also Christians and be able to share some of the challenges and struggles that we might face and some ideas with each other. There are two publications that are sponsored by the ASA. The prominent one is Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. It's a quarterly magazine and covers a wide range of topics. And so the June issue covered transhumanism. So it's an opportunity for Christians who are scientists to be able to publish along the ideas of science and faith, and so different topics with different quarterly issues. The other publication that we have is God and Nature, and also a quarterly online journal. And you can see a picture here of the co-editors, Dr. Cy Gart, whom we had speaking last month in October on a Zoom roundtable format, and co-editor Aniko Albert, shown with Francis Collins, whom I don't need to introduce you to at all. I do want to call your attention to some upcoming events. One, the 76th annual meeting of the ASA, which was canceled last year because of COVID, but we're hoping that it will continue this year. And so it's slated for July 30th through August 2nd. Hold those dates on your calendar. It's going to be well worth attending. It's in Point Loma Nazarene University, which is in sunny San Diego, California. And the theme will be exploring creation. So we're hoping that this meeting will be able to go forward. Now, students, those of you who are listening in, the cost for students is free, which you can't get better than that. And there are also scholarships, 75% discounts on room and board. So if you can get yourself out there, then the fees are significantly reduced for you to be able to participate. So I highly encourage you to attend this event if it should go forward in next year. Locally, the ASA has the Gordon College Student Chapter as well as the Boston Chapter. And so we've been privileged to have joint meetings of the Gordon College Student Chapter as well as the Boston Chapter. We try to meet quarterly. We've been meeting either on Gordon's campus, at MIT, or at Grace Chapel. And lately we've been having meetings by Zoom, but still plowing ahead even despite these pandemic times. And all are welcome to attend these quarterly meetings that are held on with different topics and different speakers. This is one of the events. The Gordon College Student Chapter will be having a movie night on November 18th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in the McDonald Auditorium in Kosk. And so those of you who are aware that the semester, at least the on-campus portion of the semester, is rapidly approaching its end, this will be a week before we leave for Thanksgiving break, and will be a great chance for students to have some socially distanced fellowship with one another and watch a movie basically featuring Bill Nye the Science Guy. So that's an event coming up. You can mark that on your calendars as well. Those of you who are not yet members, I encourage you to join the ASA. Tonight we have a special promotion. So if you're attending and participating tonight, we are offering a complimentary 1-year membership to all the non-members in attendance. So take advantage of that if you're not yet a member, and join the ASA. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael, who is going to introduce our wonderful speaker for tonight.
Thanks, Dr. Cornwell. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming out. Really glad to see people on Zoom giving up their Saturday to learn more about a challenging topic to think about as Christians. But today we have Dr. James Sherley, and he has a really unique perspective on the topic we're going to talk about. But Dr. Sherley he's a Harvard graduate, and he received his MD and PhD from Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. He also did his postdoctoral studies in cancer cell molecular biology at Princeton. He was also involved in researching and teaching about cancer cell molecular biology, tissue stem cell bioengineering, toxicology, and environmental health science through the Department of Biological Engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. With extensive knowledge and experience in stem cell technology and stem cell research, especially embryonic stem cells, Dr. Sherley certainly has a unique perspective on the controversial topic of abortion. As Christians in modern society, I'm sure that we'll all have many things to think about after tonight's meeting. But without further ado, Dr. Sherley, if you want to take the reins.
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. And I'm looking forward to presenting this and also hearing the feedback from the group. So I'm going to bring my slides up now. And if I'm correct, everybody should see the first slide now. Okay. So the topic I want to talk about today is one that is about abortion. And specifically, I want to discuss the identification of a constitutional problem with abortion that has to do with a very important principle in our Constitution of privacy. And the idea I'd like for us to discuss this evening and for you to begin thinking about is the idea that privacy begins at conception. So the decision that we're going to deal with this evening is Roe v. Wade, decided in 1973 by the U.S. Supreme Court. And this is the decision that made abortion in the U.S. legal, elective abortion is legal. And what I want to go over tonight briefly is this outline here. I want to talk about the human tragedy caused by Roe v. Wade. I'm going to spend some time talking about the science, which people think is in Roe v. Wade, that's not in Roe v. Wade. I want to focus on persons that are missing from Roe v. Wade. I'll talk a little bit about the bioethics of the research with preborn persons. And then I'll close with the starting idea that privacy is missing from Roe v. Wade. So the consequences of Roe v. Wade you may be aware of, but many people aren't. Since Roe v. Wade, 47 years, there have been 60 million preborn babies killed by elective abortion. And a disproportionate number of those are actually with women who are in disadvantaged areas, who are minorities. Now, this effect is detrimental for the women and the families of those aborted babies in a multitude of ways. But what is often not appreciated is that this type of activity in a society has an impact on the greater society on the whole. Whether or not an individual is aware that it's going on or not, it has many impacts in terms of how people treat each other, how they care for one another, how they think about one another. So this is a major impact in our society. So I want to turn to this idea that many have, and I had this idea back in 2000, before 2011, that the decision in Roe v. Wade was based on scientific knowledge. And it turns out that it really isn't. And that's what I want to go through now. So when the court was presented with the problem, the case of Roe v. Wade, the court had a problem. And I refer to it as the three-body problem because this case involved the state, the mother, and also the preborn baby. The problem the court had, and still has, is that our legal system is based on two bodies, two interests, a defendant and a plaintiff. So the problem the court had was, what could they do with this third interest, which was the preborn baby? And the solution that the court came through was to dismiss the preborn baby. And I want to take you through this evening how the court went about dismissing the preborn baby. So the first thing the court did was it raised this now famous question, when does life begin? And I'm sure you've heard this question, and I'm going to take you through how the court raised it. So the court basically said this. It says that we don't know. We don't know the answer to this question as the court. It went on to say that, and this is a quote from the decision, when those trained, I'm going to move my own screen so I can, okay. When those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus on the question of when life begins, the judiciary, the Supreme Court, at this point in the development of man's knowledge, is in no position to do this either. So the court basically says, look, if the experts don't know how to make a decision about when life begins, how can we? The problem is that if you look at this statement, there's nothing in here about science. And so the court talked about all of these other experts on when human life may begin, but it didn't include scientists in that discussion or science. So what I want to look at now is what was the biological science of the day? If you go through the decision and just do a Google search for science, it only appears twice. And those two times that it appears has nothing to do with the issue of when human life begins. So here's what the court, so this is 1973. Let's take a look at what the court did not consider. And what the court decided to ignore in 1973 is this. It's all of animal life on the planet. So we knew back in 1973 that all of the mammals that we know about, many other vertebrates on the planet, life begins with the union of sperm and egg. So there's all of this biological knowledge about how life of different organisms begin on the planet that the court just didn't consider. Another important piece of information is that in vitro fertilization was in fact known in 1973, because between 1950s and the 1970s, in vitro fertilization had been done with mammals like the rabbit. So there was no question that you could put together, when you put together sperm and egg, that you got the beginning of a life. Now, some of the purists at the time said, well, look, maybe we know this for animals, but we don't actually know that the same thing is true for human beings, right? We can't really see what's going on inside of the mother's body to know exactly what's the start of a human life. That was true in 1973, but it's no longer true anymore. And the reason it's no longer true is because of Louise Brown, who was born in 1978. And Louise Brown was born by in vitro fertilization. And that is the prima facie scientific evidence that if you bring together sperm and egg in union, you get the beginning of a human life. And we have 8 million cases of this now and increasing with time. So one of the ways in which, just rearranging my screen again here, everybody. All right. So the court basically stripped the preborn babies of legal standing in Roe v. Wade in 2 ways. I've told you about one. They basically misrepresented what was known about the beginning of human life. They represented it as if it were uncertain. And by raising that question and not having an answer to it, it means that in the legal system, when an uncertainty or an ambiguity is raised, the court doesn't have to act. You can leave things as they are. Now, the second way in which the court stripped the preborn babies of legal standing is the misrepresentation of the 14th Amendment. And I'll come to that in the second part of my talk. By using the 14th Amendment, the court withheld legal person standing from preborn persons. It withheld their privacy. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the science that the court basically ignored. And then in the end, I'll come back to this misrepresentation of the 14th Amendment. So just to review, those of you who have biology, this is going to be very basic. If you don't have a biology background, this might be helpful. But the beginning of human life is in schematic diagram here. You have a female egg with 23 chromosomes. You have the male sperm that has another set of 23 chromosomes. And at conception, these two come together and form a single cell zygote, which is the first human life. And this can happen, as I've said, naturally, or it can happen by in vitro fertilization. But you end up with a fertilized egg. It's a one-cell human embryo. It's got 46 chromosomes, and those chromosomes are in the milieu of the human egg. And this gives us a complete and activated human genome, and it's alive. And again, it doesn't matter whether it happens naturally by in vitro fertilization. You have a first human being at that point. Now, there's some discussion that went on certainly back in 2001 around what's alive. How do you know that a single cell is alive? And we know that as biologists from these simple ideas that are on this slide here. So we define living. We know something is alive when it's a cell, and it can take up energy. And that energy can be from sunlight, if you're a plant cell. It can be from organic matter. It can be from nutrients in a test tube. So that energy is taken up, and then what the cell is able to do is to do work. And that work is self-duplication. And that's the work of life. That's what living is. So it is possible for a cell to be alive and not be dividing. But when we have a cell which can take up energy and divide into 2 new cells, we know it's alive. So the zygote does that. We know the zygote's alive. But in terms of defining a human life, there's also been these criticisms and arguments made that a zygote really isn't any different than a somatic cell from our skin or from our liver, muscle, or heart. And I just want to emphasize that these 2 types of cells are fundamentally not equal. And the zygote is very special because it is a cell which, given appropriate time and conditions, is a living human being. So the single cell zygote is different. And the somatic cells in our bodies, although there's new technologies that may one day push them into that direction, currently they don't have that property. Now, I want to emphasize one other thing about this issue of what is a single cell human being. There's a lot of new technologies now to get to a zygote without either bringing together sperm and oocyte naturally or by in vitro fertilization. Scientists have found ways of taking the egg, removing the existing nuclear material, and putting in a somatic cell nucleus, one of these nuclei right here, and generating a zygote. And what I want to submit to you is that it doesn't matter how you make the zygote, it's still a human being. And we may get very clever and ingenious about making these zygotes but the point is that these zygotes, by their nature, are beginning human lives. So it doesn't matter how you get there. So this is the broad outline of the maturation of a human life. Start out with a zygote that's a one-cell person, undergoes early development and division to make an embryonic multi-cell person. And then you go to a fetal person, a baby, a child, adult, and eventually death. And one of the things to recognize is that we, whatever age we are but a projection of this single cell. We are a biological differentiated projection of that cell. And although we, as mature human beings, have trillions of cells, we're only one person. And we're the same person that started out as that single cell. This is an important concept to understand about the nature of human life. And again, it's not unique to human beings. This is true for all animals on the planet. So the continuum of human life, again, is zygote through embryo to fetus, baby, child, and adult. Now, in the abortion debate, the problem we are facing is how we assign significance of these different stages of human life. And we have assigned birth as a very important delineation. But keep in mind, birth is a human ideation. It's something we came up with because we see it, we recognize it, it's an important moment in our lives. But in terms of the significance of a human life, one can make the argument that this arrow, this vertical, should be all the way to the left. That all of these different stages of human development are significant, that they are preborn persons and they are born persons, but that they're all persons. In our society, our respect for human life is arbitrary. We currently treat born persons with protection of their lives, of their right to life, and we don't afford those same protections to preborn persons, not at abortion, not with embryonic stem cell research, not with fetal tissue research. But based on the biology of human life, all of these are human persons. Now, it may be that some of you or some people who you know may take issue with calling a zygote a person or calling an or calling an embryo a person. We want to assign special attributes to being persons, like his thinking or being able to ride a bicycle or being able to open up a book, being able to express your views, being able to speak. But those are all things that we add above personhood. Those are just the stages of development. The definition for person per Merriam-Webster dictionary is noun, a human being. Noun, a human being. So I dismiss all of these discussions about what persons are and say that by virtue of being a human being and alive, each one of these stages is a living human person. This has always been up to us, right? How we respect human life, now being more informed and having much more understanding of the biology, it remains up to us to how we will value each one of these individual persons and how we will treat them and what laws we will develop to protect them. So I told you at the beginning that I wanted to come back and not talk about just the way the court dismissed the preborn babies based on misrepresenting the beginning of human life as being uncertain. They also have done it by misrepresenting the 14th Amendment, and I want to talk about that now. So this is what the 14th Amendment says. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state where they reside. So the court took this and said, based on this, preborn people, they haven't been born, are not persons. They have no legal standing. We can dismiss them from this case. But the 14th Amendment, as you see, defines citizens. It has nothing to do with defining person, although it's been used that way. Now, if you read the decision, the court actually acknowledges that the Constitution doesn't even anticipate the issue of the legal status of preborn persons. The founders of the Constitution were not thinking about preborn babies. They were not thinking about preborn persons. But it's important to recognize they were also not excluding them. Even though the court made this acknowledgement, it still applied this incongruous basis for born, which is in the 14th Amendment, to deny standing to preborn persons. And in that moment, they deprived them of privacy. And as a result, they deprived them of life. So I want to close with these ideas around constitutional privacy in the US. If you think about privacy is a really important constitutional principle. We fight and argue about it quite a bit. There's a reason for that. If you think about what does privacy do for born persons? It protects us from oppression by our government. It protects us from oppression by our neighbors. That's why it's so important to us as citizens in this country. The problem we have right now is that we do not provide the same protections for preborn persons. We don't protect them from the government, don't protect them from their neighbors, from oppression, from death. Now, that being the case, we also recognize, although privacy is important, there's a lot of privacy discrimination that this country is continually working toward improving. And when it comes to abortion, that discrimination is centered on women and on mothers. And the challenge we have is that we should, for all other groups that have deficiencies of privacy, we should be working toward women having better rights, equal protection, the right to decide what happens with their bodies. The problem that we must face, though, is that the current way we provide better privacy to women and mothers is by giving no privacy to preborn persons. That is the rub right there. How do we find a way to do what's needed here in terms of increasing privacy for women and mothers, while at the same time not taking it away from preborn persons, from their babies? And it's even more challenging a problem because in this scenario, in some cases, the mothers become the neighbors that oppress the preborn person's privacy. So what I want to suggest is that there is a way out of this. There is a common ground. Everybody on this slide cares about privacy. Those people who are working to get it because they don't have as much as they should, they still value it for others. And so the solution here in concept is to have privacy for all, privacy for everybody, privacy for women and mothers, privacy for preborn persons. That's what we have to work to. We have to find ways that we can do what's needed here and not take away the privacy of preborn persons. So I'm going to stop there. We're going to go into breakout sessions now. And the idea, the concept that I'd like for us to try to address and dig into tonight is privacy at conception. Does it make sense to you? Would our world be better if we did that? How do you think about it? Is this a valid basis for considering privacy at conception? Where does this take us? So I'll stop there. I thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion I'll have with some of you and the questions that we can discuss at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks for that. We're just going to break up into breakout rooms. So So if you guys have any like specific questions you want to ask or just create some dialogue, it can be with the whole group. I mean, it's not too big of a group where we can just have a discussion with everyone. But if someone's talking and you have a question, you can just throw it in the chat if you want to, and we can get around to it. I'll be checking the chat. But does anyone have any questions that want to start?
Let me just say questions or comments. Doesn't have to be a question. If you got something you want to share or a thought, yeah, I'm learning too.
Yeah, even if you just want to bring up something you brought to your discussion that you thought it was interesting to think about.
I'd love to jump in if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Dr. Sherley is a wonderful argument from first principles. It's great to see you again at an ASA event. And I'm wondering if you could comment on an added aspect of the rights and nature of the preborn person from conception on, and that is that they are a genetically distinct and immunologically distinct individual, separate from the mother and worthy of all the protections of a person. That was an area that you didn't comment on in your talk, but is also, I think, relevant to the flaws in the Roe v. Wade decision. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts on that.
Hi, Mark. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, good to see you, James.
So no, I didn't spend a lot of time talking about the nature of the preborn baby and the uniqueness of each one of us. I'll highlight the uniqueness even more because one of the arguments that we've heard was that what do you do when you consider twinning that takes place early on? And isn't that a situation where, there isn't really the one entity? See, it's two, but I think and that they're theoretically the same. But in fact, twins are never identical. They're only identical at our level of resolution. Right? That uniqueness is because our genomes are so complex that the likelihood of replicating DNA at any time and not having at least one or two changes is pretty much zero. And so every person, twin, triplet, whatever, is truly a unique being. And again, as I said before, we started out by not knowing what was going on in our biology. And maybe then it was reasonable for some of the choices we made. But we are no longer there. We have a really, not a complete, but a deep understanding of the beginning of human beings. And so really, there is no biological basis for depriving the earliest forms from being called human beings, living human beings. And by that definition, they're also persons. There have been lots of sort of arguments made, rationalizations for when we can and cannot interfere with those persons' lives. But that was for our benefit, for the born. It is not for theirs. And so it takes time, I guess, in human society for our legal and policy approaches to human beings catches up with our knowledge of our human nature. I hope that was helpful, Mark.
Yeah, one question that I actually had was about like elective abortions for people who were who were raped as well as or go through incest, and just wondering. I mean, like clearly the science, or I think at least the science would show that it's still technically a life. But I mean, how would you deal with the psychological factor of a raped woman having, like, if you put the policy behind elected abortions being completely illegal? How would you go about like a woman who wants to have an abortion because she was
So the issue in that situation is not one of biology. It's a social issue. And, if you ask me my personal approach to those things, which is all I can really give you, my thought is bad things happen in the world. We have to work hard not to make them worse. And there are some who would say making it worse is having a young woman who's been violently attacked have to go through the process of that pregnancy. But we have to also weigh the detriment of destroying that preborn person. I think that the answer is always a benevolent one. We have a problem that's happened. How do we make it less of a problem for more people? Right? So we have to figure out a way to support the victims. There are two victims. One is the mother who has undergone this violent attack and all of the sequelae from that, all of the psychological and social problems from that. We have to be at our best at supporting her and her family. But we also have to support the other victim that came into life because of that event. So my solution, maybe some may say it's not practical, but in fact, I think it's the most morally consistent approach. And I'm always looking for what's morally consistent. And morally consistent is try to do good, looking for the way to do the best good. So in this debate and this discussion, I've grown to an understanding of why someone might want to do that, to end that life. I'm not so sure that doing that actually has the desired benefit and outcome. But I do think that it would be better to be morally consistent and try to protect everybody as best we can.
I think that definitely gives some insight. And I mean, I would even say on top of that, like regarding the policy behind all elected abortions, it's drops in the ocean. I mean, it's like 0.01%. It's such a small percentage of cases where it's an abortion due to rape or incest. So,
but they're still important events in people's lives, and so we don't want to minimize them. What we need to do is address them.
Yeah.
I don't think that argument is a basis for saying we should have legal elective abortions.
I completely agree. And just piggybacking off of that, so would you say the policy should be like 100%, like abortions are completely illegal?
So that's what our society has to wrestle with, what we should be doing there. James Sherley doesn't get to decide. But I think that's the issue for our society to be wrestling with. But we're not going to even get to that discussion if we don't start by recognizing that the issue that if we're gonna do abortion, we have to recognize that we are aborting human persons. That understanding is important to even get to the next discussion. Because right now, legally, we're quibbling over whether preborn persons are persons.
Yeah. Does someone else have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I actually have one. I just had was wondering what your thoughts were, Dr. Sherley, on kind of how the soul relates to abortions and just kind of how the main difference between animals and us. I mean, one main difference obviously is just like the idea of soul and the idea of an afterlife and kind of how that relates with, abortion, with an embryo,
Yeah, I don't have any scientific answers to that question. There's been a lot of philosophical discussions about, given that we have souls, when the soul appears in the person. I have no idea. But I do believe in my own faith that we have souls. I don't want to stray into the discussion of, okay, we can make decisions about when it's okay to abort fetal persons by when we think the soul is there or not. So it's definitely an intriguing discussion to think about souls and when souls come and go. I mean, think about the other end of life when we die. We believe our souls, those of us who believe we have souls, believe that our souls are eternal, to go either to good places or bad places thereafter. So so I've rambled a bit. Now I'm going to tell you what I really think. Okay. Um, my own personal thinking is that the soul that I have and the soul that you have is there at the moment that God recognizes us as people, as persons, that we are persons. So I would say that, I had a discussion at a round table some years ago about what was going on with the ability to engineer zygotes, to do manipulation and then ask what happens in the person that develops from that zygote. And as a thought experiment, I suggested that we might learn something about souls. If souls were somehow encoded in our genome, that mucking with our genome would maybe cause some problems with souls. But the truth of the matter is, right now, I don't think we really have a good understanding of what the relationship is between soul and physical being. And maybe they're unrelated. Maybe they're entwined in ways that really are important, but we don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can just.
I wonder if I might ask about contraceptives, or like at what point are they considered like abortive, or is it just whatever keeps the embryo from adhering to the uterine lining, or just, on that topic?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Ivy. Contraception, even before talking about whether it's abortive or not, the method is another issue of personal choice. And religion comes into play in terms of certain religions not thinking that contraception should be done at all. But once you are doing contraception, there are two main categories. The category you referred to is called abortifacient. And that basically means that a zygote was formed and it was destroyed by not allowing it to attach to the uterus. And that results in an abortive event. So I can never remember the names of these drugs anymore. There's something called IU4 something. It's an over-the-counter medication. There was a lot of controversy about it. Came out a few years ago. It's an abortifacient contraceptive. So it basically prevents a fertilized egg from implanting, and it leads to its death. And so these types of medications get caught up in the abortion discussion. Most of what I've been alluding to tonight has to do with fetuses that are really fully mature, easily identified. But the umbrella does include these types of agents as well, because they are causing the loss of a single cell or multi-cell human being.
I wanted to talk about, we like in our breakout room, we had talked about the idea of like energy, and how like the energy that goes into the zygote and making it is almost like with that and relating to it becoming a being when the egg and the sperm fuse and becoming a zygote, and just the energy that goes into it. And we were like trying to discuss how that relates to like other forms of things that are like on this earth, and like with solar energy, and why not like the energy that goes into that makes it like a being almost.
Okay, cool. So that's probably me not being clear. And what I mean by that is That whole presentation was about defining what's living, at least living on planet Earth. And it's at least two things, and emphasis on at least two things. So I came up with that slide because I wanted to talk with people and tell them how we were absolutely sure zygotes were alive. Because there was some question about whether they were quote unquote alive. So there are two things. If a cell does them, there's no question. It is, with energy taken up, it self-duplicates. It requires both of those things. Now, those things are not, it's possible to be living and not do those things, right? We have cells in our bodies right now that are never going to divide. And they're taking up energy, doing metabolism and things. And they're alive, right? But you can also have cells which are not dividing, and they look perfectly okay. They might even be taking up energy, and they're dead. They've died. But if a cell undergoes a self-duplication event, there is no question that it was alive. It is alive. So I was just trying to really, that slide represents trying to be very exacting about how we know zygotes are alive, because they do these two things. They take up energy and they duplicate. So just taking up energy alone, like a solar panel, does not constitute being alive. If that solar panel were able, on its own, to self-duplicate, I would have trouble saying it wasn't living. And one of the things that comes up in this discussion is there are some things on the planet that we wouldn't call living that actually do what I just said. There are crystals, for instance, that you can pump energy into, and they will actually make another one by taking material in, right? So I'm not having a debate about whether those are alive. I only want to be able to say zygotes are. So.
But let me interject one thing. But then you're kind of admitting that your definition is sufficient, but not necessary. No, sorry, that's necessary but not sufficient.
Exactly. Yeah, I am.
So you haven't really shown that zygote. I agree with you that zygotes are alive, but there's some other criteria you need to add that to finish the right, because if the crystals take in energy and reproduce, philosophers use the idea of building a little robot that builds other little robots.
Yep.
There needs to be some other criteria that's added to that list. It's incomplete.
Only if you want to distinguish that little robot from a zygote. And I don't. I'm perfectly happy for that little robot to be alive, and I might even start saying it has a right to privacy. So if we get into the discussion of what's a living human, you're right. Okay, David, you've got it.
It's a different question.
There is something else added, because I do want to say not just that it's living, I'm saying it is a living human being, and what distinguishes it from that self-duplicating robot is that human genome that causes the development of being a human being. So you're right, there is something else that's being added. It's the human genetic material.
So then if somebody did make a human genome in the laboratory, that thing would then also be made a zygote out, would be human.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, people have done that. You guys may recall some time back the controversy around human cloning. People were taking sources of human genomes, nuclei, putting them in eggs, and producing early embryos. But they didn't want to say they were human beings because of all the obvious problems with saying they were human beings. But they are. They are.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat actually from
Okay.
And he says, do you have any ideas on how to implement policy protecting the privacy rights of all groups, mothers and the unborn? What does that look like?
Yeah, I took that out of my talk. I certainly have been thinking about that. I think there are two things. I was involved in trying one of them, right? One of them is correcting Roe v. Wade. And what I want to suggest to people who are pro-choice is that correcting or ending Roe v. Wade is not ending choice. It's increasing privacy. So that would be I think one thing we have to do something about the law that enables legal elective abortions. I'm not sure that's enough. I've also suggested that we have to have a new amendment. It is an amendment that recognizes even the smallest single cell zygote as a person. And in this country, if it is created in this country, recognizes it as a citizen of this country with all the rights that the other citizens have, which are the right to privacy and life. So those are active things to be working toward. One, I said I've been involved in the issue of trying to correct Roe. One has to get before the Supreme Court a case that calls into question or requires a revision or revisit to the original decision. And we tried that back in 2009 unsuccessfully when President Barack Obama made a mandate that human embryonic stem cell research was going to be funded by the U.S. government. And we raised the issue that was, at the time, we thought an illegal act, and that it would be a way of getting in front of the court eventually to have a rediscussion about the lack of science in Roe. So there are other things we can do that are not so specific, and that is talking to others. The grassroots approach of information. One of the things that I think we need more of in this country is that most people, or many people that I've talked with, don't understand the biology of human life. So getting across some of these ideas that we are biologically human beings from the very beginning, and because of that, we should be considered for personhood in the law, is not widely recognized, even by people who are against abortion. So education is really the thing that's needed more than anything else, I think, right now. That the population has to become knowledgeable of what we are before we can have informed discussions about how we treat ourselves at different stages of our development.
I think Liam wanted to say something.
Actually, I wanted to say something to Liam. So, Liam, what were you eating earlier? Because you were making me hungry.
Oh yeah, of course. Got some Chipotle.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the only thing I wanted to say, and I guess this is kind of in response to some of the things David was saying. The question isn't about energy or just life in general, like how do we classify life? I think what we're talking about here, and I think you mentioned it too, like we're talking specifically about human life, especially in relation to the government's responsibility to and its compelling interest to uphold the value of life. And if we can classify, and I think it's also important to note that the human genomes or the zygotes created in the labs are a very minuscule part of, I guess, unborn children that
Yeah.
in this discussion. The overwhelming amount of children in this discussion are children who are dying because of abortion. So that's the real life implication we're talking about. We can have that philosophical, ethical discussion with whether or not it's even ethical to create a zygote in a lab. I think that's another discussion, but this discussion here is we're talking about if a zygote is a human life, what should the government's responsibility be in protecting that? particularly when we're considering Supreme Court law in regards to that. And I think it's also like important to consider too, like ending Roe v. Wade is only one part. It's only a step in the right direction, because all it would do is provide states the ability to craft their own legislation around abortion. Before Roe v. Wade, we had around 30-ish states who had completely legalized abortion in nearly every single circumstance. So, but because of it now, and because of Planned Parenthood versus Casey and multiple other cases, just the ability for states to impose restrictions and therefore to protect life has ultimately been hindered in lots of different ways. But I think with the recent Supreme Court nominees and just the composition of the court, I'm at least a little more hopeful that with cases we can see progress on this issue. I don't know. I'll let David respond if he wants to.
So I'm not sure what kind of, I'm not sure what the question for me was. So maybe elaborate a little bit.
I'm just wondering, like, what were some of the implications of the questions you were asking? You asked if the human being, if we're talking about genomes, and you talked about like how they're created in the lab. I'm wondering what you're implying by asking that question.
So I'll direct a sort of, I guess, question sort of at James as well. I think part of the argument that James is making is that, okay, you have conception, it meets criteria for being living, it has a human genome, so you could say that's the beginning of a human life. But then there's also the question of when does it become a person? Is there a difference between potentially becoming a person? I can translate to the end of a life. I had my grandmother died of Alzheimer's, and at the end of life, anything I understood as person had gone. It was sort of a human tape player. So it's not at all. It's not. I don't have an opinion. I really don't know at what point at the end of the life can something stop being a person? Is it just or the beginning? So I mean that's a honest question. Is how does one define person?
So hypothetically, if somebody harms or shoots your relative with Alzheimer's, would that be killing a life, a human being? And would that be considered unethical?
Well, it'd certainly be illegal. It'd certainly be killing the human machinery. It certainly wouldn't be. You wouldn't do that to a dog. So, or maybe somebody would. You wouldn't want to harm a creature. So, but I say, what is the essence of the human being?
So are you saying that
I don't have a good answer for you.
Mm-hmm.
So
having lived through that.
So one of the things I would add here is, first, I just want to thank Liam for regrounding us.
Yeah.
Because where my presentation starts is with the 60 million fetuses that have been aborted.
Yeah.
And it is a profound thing. 800,000 are being aborted every year. But regards to the issue of persons, see, David, the way I would characterize it, it is not a question of whether at any point the human being is a person. It's only an issue of what kind of person. You've described a change in a person. And I think unless we can get to that understanding of our nature, we'll be ever having ways of rationalizing why one stage is more important than another stage. Other than this, we care about them differently. So the state can't have that. We cannot have the state making those kinds of arbitrary. The state has to protect us at all times. Is my position. And I think Liam, you're right that Roe is only just the beginning of it because of what you said about states being able to make those decisions. But we need a federal mandate, be it amendment or law, that recognizes these realities about human beings. If for those of us who want to move to a new place where we don't abort our fetuses.
Yeah, and I'd say even piggybacking off of this, I think if you look at the reverse, I think it's a lot harder to prove that it's not a life in when it's still inside the womb. Because I mean, if you make the argument that it doesn't get heart function till whatever week, I mean, then you could then make the case that, let's say, someone who's 40 years old who has a pacemaker and can sustain their own heartbeat without a pacemaker, then is that considered a life then too? And then if you make the comment or make the idea that they don't get nervous system control until whatever week, or don't have a sustainable nervous system, then people who are in a coma, who have no control over their nervous system, are they considered a human? And so I think it just becomes really difficult to prove the reverse, even if you can't prove necessarily what a life is. It's much harder to prove that it's not a life when it's a fetus. So.
I just want to, it's okay, I just touch on the personhood discussion. I think the idea of personhood being separate from we're talking about the intrinsic value of human life. I don't think that's a good distinction you can make, because personhood is a concept based on one, individual autonomy and consciousness. And if we define the value of human life based on those two factors, one, somebody can lack individual autonomy because of some mental illness or because of some medical problem, but that doesn't diminish the fact that they're still a human being worthy of protection under the law. Somebody can lack consciousness because they're in a coma, but that doesn't diminish their ability under the law, and neither should it diminish. It doesn't diminish their worth under the law, and it shouldn't in any way negate their value. I mean, it might negate their value, practically speaking, as human beings, because we think of things in a very transactional sense, like how can they contribute to society? How much of a burden are they on society? But those are ultimately questions, very utilitarian questions, that completely ignore just the very real issue of how do we as a society view human life? Do we view it as intrinsically valuable? Do we view it as something that was made and it's cherished and precious underneath the eyes of God? So I think really, if you are to dissect the personhood arguments, I think you see that they fall apart, and they ultimately stem from ideas that just manifestly ignore the intrinsic value of human life.
I'm also of the view and hope that a society that doesn't do what we're doing now, doesn't abort preborn persons, is a better society for everybody, especially those who are not powerful in the society. And that's a hypothesis, isn't it? I mean, but if you're in a society where people often are able or at will to injure others who are weaker, that society is not good for the strong either. It could be better. And I just think that this activity that's been going on for almost 50 years in this country has hurt us in many other ways. And for me, I'll just tell you, as a Black person in this country, with my racial heritage in this country, there are some really powerful parallels between abortion and slavery and racial discrimination. we get these things right, we all are going to be better off. And I think so. I find that the big issue with abortion and its legalization is that we have this huge tragedy going on. I mean, it's just every time I get up and think about this, I have trouble walking sometimes. That almost 1 million kids are killed in this country every year. It cannot be good for any of us that this is going on. It means that we are not taking care of people who need us, who need help, need support. We're not doing it. All right, so I've kind of gotten off my academic and I've kind of gotten into my own passion about this now, but it's really an important issue, people. Yeah. I think it really is an important issue.
I have a question for you, Dr. Sherley.
Yeah.
Would you say that the research you've done with like fetal stem cells, I'm correct in that you've done research with fetal stem cells, is that right?
I'll qualify that, but go ahead. Yes.
So maybe not your research in particular, but the research that's been done, do you think it's justified? Like,
no.
You don't think it's justified?
Nope. And I'll tell you why. So it turns out I discovered that I, in fact, recently had done research with fetal cells, fetal-derived cells. There's no question they come from a electively aborted fetus. And when I learned that, my decision was I cannot do that anymore, and I have forewarned other scientists in our published reports of the error that we made. Why is it important that we not do this? So we have a lot of vaccines right now that are being produced in fetal-derived cell lines from aborted fetuses. Those vaccines potentially can help many, many different people. Okay. But we had alternatives at the time those cell lines were derived, and we have alternatives now. So there's no reason for us to continue. Why should we stop? To be morally consistent. If we're going to stand and say, you know, we shouldn't abort fetuses now and take their body parts and do experiments with them, then we can't use materials that derive from that source. It's just morally inconsistent. So, and it's important to emphasize because people say, well, gee, we're giving up all these opportunities for benefits. We're not. There are many alternatives to using those fetal-derived cell lines. I don't need to keep using them for what we were doing in the first place. And the same thing's true for the vaccines that are being made. There are many cell lines that are available, not derived from fetal tissue, that work just as well. And it's just inertia, and in some cases, financial, economics for why these companies don't change. If you made it an advantage for them to change, they could change yesterday. So that's the reason why I take that position.
So there is like substantial evidence that there are other forms of vaccine development and production that are just as or almost as efficient as using.
So not just evidence. There are some companies are using cell lines that are not derived from fetuses.
Okay, that's probably objective proof then.
Yeah. There's a really good page at the Charlotte Lozier Institute's webpage outlining all of the various major vaccines, like 15 of them underway. Talks about what types of cells are being used. You can go there and learn more about it if you're interested.
I've got another question too. So this is like more of an ethics issue than a straight science, is that if you are to suspend all elective abortions entirely in all instances, regardless of circumstance, and I'm not assuming that's anyone's viewpoint, but if you were, how do you then deal with the implications of these children being born to predominantly disadvantaged situations?
2 words is called provide support. The rest of us, so there's a place also for trying to do what's needed to minimize these abortions. Oh, that's a statistic I want to share with you guys. You can actually see it yourself if you just go to the CDC. So abortions started happening, and there are about 1 million fetal abortions a year in the country. Now they're about 800. If you follow the track of births, there is a corresponding increase in births to single mothers. It almost parallels it. So on the one hand, there are all of these abortions that are taking place, but on the other hand, at the same last 15, 20 years, there's been an increase in the number of women who keep their children, almost on the same order of magnitude. Now, I don't know if that represents women becoming more empowered in this country of ours, having more opportunities, or changing their attitude, a change in support for them. I don't know, but I'm trying to understand why this is happening. I bring it up because that is the solution. It is supporting those people who in our country who need help. Not just when at the moment of the birth, but prior to that, prenatal care, all of prior to that.
And to add to that point, there's actually 4 times as many pregnancy crisis centers as there are Planned Parenthoods. It's just that it's not as well known because Planned Parenthood has a lot of systematic organization, while the pregnancy crisis centers are usually local resources. And so if you feel called to support women pre-birth, getting involved in your local community is actually the best way to help those women because they have a lot of the resources that they would need to prevent abortions.
Thank you for that, Deborah. I should also mention too, I just learned at a trip out to St. Louis that there are also community institutions that are homes where a lot of times, sometimes when a mother decides to have a baby, sometimes her family puts her out. So there are places where people can go and live and raise their children with care and good health care. We need to put more dollars into that instead of into Planned Parenthood. And believe me, Planned Parenthood, it's a lot of money from the government. So there are solutions. We're smart people. We just have to figure out what we want to do and do it.
I would agree with that because in my eyes right now, the current system does not provide enough incentive, I guess, for women to forego an abortion in the support for after birth care or prenatal care or realistic foster or adoption options. So I think I can wholeheartedly agree. Like the best way to prevent abortions isn't really to make it illegal, but to just make it not the best option for the mother.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even phrase it as not make. I guess what I want to say is make life the thing that you can do. You can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with that. It is 6:30, and that is the posted time when we were gonna wrap things up. But I think that was a really good discussion to sort of think about, especially as Christians, because it is a difficult one to think about. But Dr. Sherley, did you want to have any concluding points, or?
I would just want to say thank you. Thank you for partaking in this discussion. Sometimes it's very challenging. It's unusual to have a forum like this. So I appreciate it. I've learned some things. I hope you have too. And I look forward to maybe in the future having another exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One thing, just as we're closing, I just wanted to announce that we're having a movie night coming up. For the ASA, we're going to be watching the Bill Nye event. Just wanted to point that out again. But an email is going to be sent out when that starts, when we start bearing down on the event. But it's relating to sort of balancing science and faith. But I mean, for any information about the ASA, I just wanted to point out the leaders of the ASA. It's me, and then Travis Singh, Caitlin Kwok, Miranda Pomfret, and Connor Ruland. So you guys know who we are. But just as we close, I just want to pray over us, and then we can start heading out. But if you'll just bow your heads with me real quick. Dear Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you that we all could come here on a Saturday and learn more about abortion and sort of have a really good discussion about it, and we can understand it through our own eyes as well as you see it through your eyes, God. I pray that you'll watch over us, and in your name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
That's all we really had planned. So gonna sort of close the meeting now. If the leaders just want to stay on after this, but you guys are good to head out. Thank you. Thank you everyone for showing up.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you everyone for putting this on.